There you go. Okay.
Hi, everyone.
Let's see.
Can you hear me okay? Can you hear me? Hi, can you hear me? Okay, great, great. Is the volume all right too? Okay. Perfect. Perfect. It's 1:59 in my phone, so I'll wait about a minute or so, and then I can get started.
There you go. Okay.
Hi, everyone.
Let's see.
Can you hear me okay? Can you hear me? Hi, can you hear me? Okay, great, great. Is the volume all right too? Okay. Perfect. Perfect. It's 1:59 in my phone, so I'll wait about a minute or so, and then I can get started. Welcome, everyone. For those of you who are just joining, Pam Pam 87, Prof Navarro, Lollipop, Max, hello. Hi, Hannah. M. Garcia. Hi, Miss Mocap. Boy Ginger. All right. Hello, everyone, and thank you for being here. It's 2 o'clock, so I'll go ahead and get started. My name is Dr. Aditi Samarth. I teach humanities. I teach humanities at Richland College. The courses that I teach are in American Minority Studies and World Arts and Cultures. So today I'm going to be talking about xenophobia and COVID-19's impact on the Asian American and other ethnic minority communities. So first, let me define what xenophobia is so that we're all on the same page. Xenophobia is the fear and hatred of strangers or foreigners. When left unchecked, it can lead to racism because of the belief that a particular race, generally one's own race, is inherently superior to others. It's important to remember, especially during times of crises, that xenophobia and racism are not new behaviors. They have existed for as long as people have carried differences. That's practically all the time, all through human history. You may have experienced some kind of a xenophobic attack, but I remember mine, even though it was so long ago. It was in 1987 when I first came to the United States. And I was driving with a few of my college mates, about 5 of us, and I heard the girl in the car next to me scream something out. And I was very polite. I rolled down the window to hear what she was saying. I thought maybe she needed directions or something. But she yelled outside and she said, "Go back to Mexico." And I thought to myself, why Mexico? I'm not from Mexico. And it really confused me for a very long time. I kept wondering why Mexico, because I am not from Mexico. I remember feeling vulnerable and personally attacked, unsafe, as if I didn't belong here. Somewhere I was not welcome. That encounter and the ways in which I dealt with it has helped me to understand deep-rooted ethnic, cultural, and socio-economic behaviors, and to not perceive differences as threats, but rather as opportunities to understand the rich diversity of our shared world. History shows us that racism spikes when people feel threatened, such as the violence against migrant Latino workers after World War II, and the 1992 LA riots, which caused immense property and economic damage to Korean Americans, and in South Central LA's Koreatown, which was the center of protests, arson, and looting. After 9/11, the Muslim community in the United States and the world over felt the brunt of otherness, if you will, and they became associated with terrorist activities. Today, 19 years after that event, what is the first reaction in the media? And when any one of us hears of mass shooting or a plane crash or any kind of group violence, is it a terrorist attack? So this kind of consciousness is very, very deeply rooted. Whenever there is listeria or E. coli outbreaks, we see a backlash against immigrant workers as if they are the weakest links and hold personal responsibility in the entire food chain supply. All these examples show us that when unchecked, stereotypes surface and resurface and are compounded during times of crises. They aim to focus on and shame into correction, to adhere to conform the seemingly weak and marginalized members of society. Again, xenophobia and racism are not new, but they exacerbate during times of crises. At the national level, patriotism surges and deeply held sentiments regarding one's own identity are revealed in the presence of a threat, whether the threat is real or imagined. So let's look at COVID-19's impact on the Asian American community and some other ethnic minority communities. Before I talk about the Asian American community, I want to make sure that we're not thinking about just one homogeneous community. So let's try to put it in the larger context of America. The population of the United States is roughly 331 million, which is the third largest in the world, 4.25% of the total world population. Asian Americans make up about 22 million of U.S.'s population. The U.S. population is diverse. It is representative of 20 different countries that are in East, Southeast Asia, and in the Indian subcontinent. Each has unique histories, cultures, languages, which are all the different metrics of diversity. In the United States, the largest Asian American ethnic group is Chinese Americans. They make up about 24%, roughly 1/4 of the Asian American population, and they are at 4.9 million. Indian Americans, about 20%, 1/5 of America's population is 4 million. Filipino Americans, 3.9 million. And then Vietnamese, Korean, and Japanese Americans are 1 million each. So the remaining 12% of all U.S. Asian Americans account for the remaining 13 groups. But Asian Americans are also the fastest growing minority group in the United States. By the year 2055, 35 years from now, Asians are projected to become the largest immigrant group in the country, surpassing Hispanics. In 50 years from now, Asians are projected to make up 38% of all U.S. immigrants, whereas 31% will be Hispanic. So these are numbers from the Pew Research Center. Think about the predominant ideas or stereotypes or cultural perceptions that we have of Asian Americans in our country. So when our nation is not in a crisis mode, Asian Americans are considered a model minority, a myth that you probably have heard of. In the 1966 New York Times Magazine article, Success Story, Japanese American Style, the idea of Asian socioeconomic attainment was glorified. Several studies thereafter sealed the model minority myth, which categorized Asian Americans, all of them, all of the 20 different countries that are lump summed or grouped under the Asian American identity. So all of them were considered to be passive, quiet, pulling up their bootstraps and keeping their noses to the grindstone in maintaining the majority status quo. So they do their thing, they contribute, and that's it. They don't make any inappropriate noise. So conformity was highly prized. You've probably heard of the book Battle Hymn of the Tiger Mother, or generally referred to as the Tiger Mom. Pam Pam 87. Yes, we really do have a skewed perception of immigration and race. Absolutely. And the thing is, so many of us think of these numbers as absolutely fixed, and they are not. Our country is very large. And as a result of that, you're going to find different demographics dominate in different parts of the United States. So not only that, in addition to the geographical diversity of the races and ethnicities, they're also constantly changing. At one point in time, Asian Americans were truly the minority, and the idea was it's the Hispanics that are the fastest growing group. But from the year 2000 to 2015, it was Asian Americans that grew from 11.9 million to almost 20 million, an unprecedented growth. Yes, you're absolutely right. We need to keep current with the changing landscape of our own country. Let me go back to the book, the 2011 book, The Idea of the Tiger Mom. So basically what Amy Chua says in her book is, yes, it's definitely a stereotype. So what she says is that the Chinese disciplined model of child raising is better than the permissive Western model. And of course, the book was not without controversy. I have to tell you that up front. So she emphasized in her book the Eastern value of academic achievement over Western parenting focus on self-esteem. And as I said, there was a lot of dialogue. It was a nationally polarizing discussion, if you want to think of it that way. But yet the idea emerged out of it that academic success in children reflects successful parenting. To extend that idea further, think about our national spelling bee contests, which are held every year. So the Scripps National Spelling Bee Championship in 2019, last year, 7 out of 8 spelling bee winners were Indian American. And people want to jump to the conclusion. I know this has happened to me as an Indian American myself. I remember we were at one of the airports, and I was with my two young boys at that time. And I remember being a little strict with my son. He was about 5 years old at that time. And as children are wont to do, he was touching things and picking up, "Mommy, I want this. Mommy, I want this." And I said, "No." And so he would drop it right there. And I said, "No, you cannot leave your things here. You need to go back and put it where you found it." And I remember this lady, she was a white lady. She observed me for a long period of time, and then she started to tell me how she really liked my parenting style. But then I realized that she didn't know me. She was really placing me in a much larger context, things that she had seen or read, or maybe she had met some other Indian Americans. But she was forming her own stereotypes. I'm not always that disciplined. I don't think all parents are that disciplined. I think there are people from Asian American, African American, Hispanic, many other communities where moms can be strict when they think they need to be, maybe more in public sphere. Maybe at other times they are not. So I don't really think that the applaud I got, which I was grateful for, was really reflective of me being an Indian American mother at all. To dig a little deeper into this idea and the myth that this is how all Asians are, they're all smart, they're all doing what they need to do. There was a film called Breaking the Bee by Sam Rega, the filmmaker, and he told CBS News that when he and his team were researching the Indian American spelling bee phenomenon, they learned that from 1965, when there was a change in immigration laws, it allowed highly educated immigrants and individuals to come to our country. And a big wave of Indian Americans were brought into the country, and that set the foundation. With the rest of the timeline, in 1985, Balu Natarajan became the first Indian American winner. As soon as people saw that he could do it, that told everyone else, if he can succeed, I can succeed. So we might want to look at more than ethnicity, more than race, more than any type of hyphenated American to look for answers, because maybe structural setup is a much more accurate indicator of being the model in the model minority myth. So I'm looking at a few questions here. Some people let their children run all over them. In some cases, that is probably true. In my view, and I speak as a mother and someone who has a lot of friends and colleagues who have children, so many times we try to do the best we can, but you just don't know where we're coming from. Sometimes you can tell a child and they will listen the first time. Sometimes you can tell them 10 times and they will still keep arguing with you. It's just a process. And I think being aware that others are different from us, that they're not the same way that we are. They have other factors that they have shaped them, will certainly impact the way in which they deal with their children. So again, what I had said was structural setup may be a more accurate indicator of being the model in the model minority myth, and it may not really have a whole lot to do with being Chinese American or Indian American or any other. Your little one is wild. I don't know how old your little one is. Shelly, 21, 2012. My son is 12, not so little, and he is a wild boy, and he takes so much pride in it too. Sometimes it's impossible to correct him, and at those times I just have to let it slide because he really enjoys a good altercation. He's very good at arguing. He has much more time on hand than I do, so I know I've had to. 3 years old, yes, yeah. Yes, enjoy the journey. That's what I can say. All right. So again, to talk a little bit about not stereotyping, not lump summing all the ethnic groups in one group. So the median U.S. household income is $53,600 nationally. And for Asian Americans, it's $73,060. Within this broad range, that is Asian American, we have a huge disparity. So for example, Indian Americans have the highest median household income of 100,000, followed closely by Filipino Americans, which is $80,000. Japanese and Sri Lankan Americans, 74,000, whereas Burmese and Nepalese Americans have 36,000 and 43,500 respectively. So as you can see, there is a huge disparity, 100,000 and 36,000. So there's a huge gap, as you can see, within the socio-economic and educational standing within the Asian American group. So the question, Pam 87, by structural setup, do you mean that the system creates conditions for certain groups to be successful? Absolutely. And I gave the example of the favorable immigration policies after the Immigrant Exclusion Act. We saw the U.S. borders opening up to immigrants under certain criteria starting in 1965. And so the surge, the growth, if you will, and I gave the example of the National Spelling Bee, the very first one that was won by an Indian American in 1985, 20 years after that wave of first immigration. But United States has this policy of cherry picking, of choosing, if you will, who enters, when, what numbers. We have quotas that we have to meet. And so accordingly, we will see the ebb and flow of race and ethnic relationships in our country because they are a reflection of what each group is doing. So yes, it is a structural setup, and it's made like that. And there are many other examples in health and in business industry. Who gets the prime time real estate, for example, the prime location. So all of those are factors that are part of the structural setup, and we all become part of that system, a result of preferential treatment for immigration. All right, let me talk a little bit about our current COVID-19 situation and its impact on three different ethnic minority groups. So first and foremost, and I'm only talking about the Asian American community first because it is such a timely topic. So as you may know, the outbreak of the virus is traced to the Wuhan province in China. So the virus was labeled the Chinese virus, ensuing stigma against Chinese people and things and everything else that may look Chinese. In addition to enduring racial profiling and attacks, the Chinese American community is also weathering an economic storm. The restaurant industry in general has taken a huge hit during COVID-19 crises, but Chinese restaurants in particular have sustained the worst blow. As of April 15, 59% of independent Chinese restaurants across America had completely ceased operations. Prior to the COVID-19 outbreak, there were 270 restaurants in New York City's Chinatown. As of April 24th, only 40 remained in business. In San Francisco's Chinatown, out of 150 Chinese restaurants, 40 remain in operation. The majority of Chinese restaurants are independent and they cannot weather the financial storm from the coronavirus. It will require very targeted government assistance. However, if you're aware of the chains, P.F. Chang's and Panda Express, which are part of corporate chains emblematic of American capitalist structure, both of those franchises remain robust. The impact of the coronavirus on the African American community has been acute. They have felt the economic and health impact of the virus more than any other ethnic group. So on Tuesday, April 28th, The Guardian published an article titled African Americans Bear the Brunt of COVID-19's Economic Impact. The article highlighted racial disparities, with Black workers expected to feature disproportionately in the 30 million recent unemployment claims. In February 2020, the national unemployment rate was 3.5%, with African American unemployment rate at 5.8% and white unemployment rate at 3.1%. After the last recession, the national unemployment rate peaked at 9.6% in 2010, whereas it was 16% for Black Americans. New York's governor, Andrew Cuomo, had called the coronavirus a great equalizer, but data shows the virus has been anything but indiscriminate. Its disproportionate impact on Black Americans is especially evident in predominantly African American cities such as New Orleans, Chicago, and Detroit. In Chicago, which is 30% Black Americans account for 70% of all coronavirus cases in the city and more than half of the state's deaths. Because African Americans are concentrated in urban areas and work in essential industries, they face a higher risk of exposure to the virus. According to Economic Policy Institute, only 20% of Black workers reported being eligible to work from home, as opposed to about 30% of their white counterparts. You're right, Shelley. New York and California had some of the strictest restrictions, though. Yes, absolutely. But there are many factors such as a late start. Certain restrictions were enforced earlier than at other times. There were also protests, for example. So we have to look at the reinforcement in a much broader perspective. Yes. The impact on Chinese restaurants is partially due to, yes. You're absolutely right. People are very careful. I mean, restaurants in general have experienced a huge hit. I know, for example, I'm not eating out. Most people in my neighborhood are not eating out, not even takeout. In fact, the last time I ate out or my family got meal from out was on March 1st. Am I tired of cooking? Of course, yes. But it's an effort to stay safe. It is not an attempt by any measure to try to ostracize or outcast any particular business, much less a group of people. Yes, he has. Cuomo has changed his tune now. Absolutely. Yes, Marletta, good question. Does that mean that African Americans are being affected at a higher rate than others? Yes, depending on the kinds of work they do, because it doesn't allow for remote work or online work. I know you have read this in the news too. Grocery store workers, for example, are exposed to or likely to be exposed to the virus at a much higher rate than someone working from home, for example. So by affected, I mean affected by COVID-19. Yes, absolutely. There are some health factors also that have come into play. Let me go to the next ethnic group that I was going to talk about, which is the Latinos. And in the Latino community, they have also had to bear a lion's share of the COVID-19 affliction. And generally, the only underlying illness, if you will, the background disease that CDC has been talking about is diabetes for the Latinos. Otherwise, there's really not been any other health issue that was identified for the Latino community. But they make up the majority of the essential workforce. So you're looking at grocery store staff, restaurant workers, caretakers, cleaners, and delivery workers. And because they have to go to work, this is not something that they can do online. They are at the front line of the pandemic. So, and in Professor Navarro is asking, and in Detroit, so many rely on public transportation and it's harder to social distance. You're absolutely right. Being in close proximity of other people, movement. In the beginning of my conversation, I talked about how there's this predominant idea that migrants, because they are constantly on the move, they are not staying put, they contribute to a lot of the problems. But again, it's a structural problem. That is the nature of the job. This is the job that these people are most likely to partake in. And so as a result of that, they will be exposed to it far more than others who are working maybe from the comfort of their homes. So they may not have the opportunity to protect themselves like some others do. So the point that I made was that because of the nature of the work, the Latinos are at the forefront of the pandemic. In New York City, the virus results in death at 1.6 times the rate that is killing white people. In Utah, Latinos are infected and hospitalized at 3 times the rate of whites. Latinos are 14% of the population, but 29% of the COVID patients. In Oregon, Latinos are 13% of the population, but 22% of COVID cases. In New Jersey, 19% of population and nearly 30% of COVID cases. In Washington State, 13% of population and nearly a quarter, 25% of COVID cases. So one of the questions that I saw a little earlier, I will need to scroll up here, was, is it something inherently that is in the African American ethnic group? We don't have enough research to point to any such absolute or authoritative answer, but we know from the Centers of Disease Control that social distancing is paramount. But when people are pressed to go to work, their job depends on it. They need the income. They have to feed their families in so many cases. They don't really have a choice, so they have to put themselves out there, which makes their health vulnerable. And a lot of these numbers may be simply a reflection of having to go to work to support our economy and others who need those services. A lot of small businesses are suffering for sure. I'm looking at some of the questions that have come up. Pam 87. Yes, absolutely. The hardest hit are the small businesses because they don't have enough revenue to really carry them over sometimes even more than a month. So it's good that there is some government assistance in terms of not paying rent and a few other features. Pam 87, minority communities don't have privileges, socioeconomic privileges, and so are more vulnerable. It's a race and, of course, a class issue. Absolutely. There are so many issues that will divide us on race, but that will unify us on class issues. One of the most understated and probably under-researched areas of human diversity is class. And I read an article, not related to today's talk, but it talked about how there are 3 things that researchers can never really gain accurate information on. Because people are not either likely to speak the truth, or 2, they themselves have very skewed ideas about these 3 things. And they are religion, money, and personal sex life. Those are the 3 things that people will either not divulge, or they themselves have very different ideas about their personal standing on these 3 matters. Spanish flu was called this. They were the only country reporting on the flu. This is different. Absolutely, Professor Navarro. During the World War, Spanish flu 1918 to 1920. So at that time, Italy, France, England, they were all involved in the wartime effort. And in order to not minimize the efforts that were being put out by these countries, news media were not able to report on the war, whereas Spain was neutral. And so all the news that came out on the pandemic was from Spain on the influenza pandemic of 1918, 1920. And that's why it's called the Spanish flu. And of course, it spread again because military personnel were moved from one location to another. So again, this idea, movement, migration, which is necessary for wartime effort, for agricultural workforce, and yet the majority population would not look at it in the same way or from the same lens. That boy Ginger, and your comment is the goal, ATM, was never to cure the illness. The goal is to flatten the curve. Absolutely. And that's why we have to be so careful. At the end of today, for example, Governor Abbott, Texas Governor Abbott, has said to ease the restrictions. So movie theaters, malls, restaurants will be open and functioning at 25% capacity. But yet we need to maintain social distance, wear masks, to be on the safer side, because otherwise we might overwhelm our healthcare system, and we may just not be able to save as many lives.
Hey Pam, did we lose the feed? Pam, are you there?
I'm on. Can you hear me? Can someone let me know if you can hear me?
Pam?
I see Pam ATM at the moment. Sorry. Can you hear me? Can someone let me know if you can hear me? To type yes or respond yes. Yes. Okay. Perfect. Michelle, I'm good. I just got a response from Shelley 21-2012. Very good. Thank you, Robertson and Garcia. Thank you. Perfect. All right. Great. Thank you. Hear and see me. Thank you. Okay. So the measures that we exercise, the social distancing, the stringent following of social distancing is ultimately meant to flatten the curve so that we don't overutilize and overwhelm our healthcare system. All right, so if there are questions, I will gladly take them. I think I've addressed all the questions so far, but I do want to make a few closing comments. The first thing that I want to tell you is that when I threw out those numbers, none of them were meant to be sensational. This is information that you can find very easily. All I did was try to synthesize it and put it or present it in a cohesive manner. But I can see how it is so easy to feel overwhelmed with all the information that's out there. What can we do? We can take action, whether it's against a personal attack that is made to us or against the structural setup that so many of us are a part of, and we may have had nothing to do with it. We didn't set up the system, in other words. What I try to do is I think globally and act locally. So what that means is if you think something is not right or looks suspicious, first and foremost, trust your instinct. Ask some questions. Identify the situation. Don't ignore it. Do something. Act. Second, speak up. You need to realize that you are not alone. You can find comfort and voice in community and with like-minded persons. There's always strength in numbers. Another thing that we can do, if you see any kind of xenophobic attack or remark, or something that is not looking right to you, ask a few questions. Don't personalize it. Do not internalize it and don't take it personally. Recognize that people act from the place that they are in. They are simply reflecting what they know. So if they've had a lack of exposure, lack of experience, and lack of education, then they can only act from their limited worldview. And then for each one of us, I would say try to gain as much diversity experience as possible. Ask yourself, have I stepped outside of my own immigrant group experience? Have I attended other cultural events? Have I ever felt like I was uncomfortable? And what did I do? What was my coping mechanism? How did I deal with it? Look around you. Do you have friends or other close relations or friendships with people from other ethnic groups? So there are constantly ways in which we can make ourselves culturally competent, interculturally effective, and as a result of that, minimize ways in which we might be showing bias to other people. Finally, the more we attempt to understand others, the less likely we are to feel threatened by them. And that's why it's highly important that we try to be friends with, work with people, and try to see where they come from, understand their point of view, develop empathetic approach in looking at people and not just jump to conclusions. Absolutely, Pam 87, diversify your friend circle, ask questions, don't feel intimidated. Your first response should not be one of threat. What are we really threatened by? Human differences? On a logical level, we all like to think that we are diverse, we represent diversity, that we are not racist, that we are not subjecting other people to racist thoughts and ideas and conversations. But really take a step back and ask yourself right in that moment of crisis, have I done something that might be construed by a person of this particular race or this particular group as divulging my own racial bias? And you can take it from there. We can all learn. Professor Navarro, the student club events help. We can embrace each other. Absolutely. As a student community, we have very readily available support systems. You always have professors you can talk to. You have classmates at Richland College, particularly. You know how diverse our campus is. So you can certainly talk to students from other campus, other classes that you're taking, and try to learn about others. Once you know something about another person, it cannot be a threat to you because now you understand. You have the lens of understanding to evaluate, to assess the many diverse and complex features, traits, characteristics that make up a person. I cut off in everyone in quarantine, no discrimination. That is very equitable, Shelley, 21-2012. Very nice comments. Not your 3-year-old son, I'm sure. If there are questions, I'll be happy to answer them. Being culturally curious, absolutely, Professor Navarro. Be interested in other people. Sometimes my children will say to me that they're bored, and I always tell them that only boring people are bored. So if you are with someone who scares you or threatens you or makes you feel bored, maybe you should cultivate your own interests. Not everything, but maybe pick aspects of another culture or topics that interest you and find a similar ground. Maybe using the cliche, build a bridge to another person. With what's going on now, how do we find ways to keep this diverse communication going? Tyler Wells. Good question, Tyler. I'm going to assume that you were taking a class at Richland College and you have access to your class group, your community. I don't know if you're doing any group work, end of semester projects in an online format. Those are some ways. I have joined a few groups on Instagram, on Facebook. So I hear a lot of news. I'm able to participate. I'm able to ask questions. I talk to many of my neighbors who are from different parts of the world. Fortunately, many of my colleagues at Richland embody diversity. Many of our students bring that to the classroom. So there is no dearth of diverse communication and experiences in our community. Pam87, follow different accounts and groups on social media. Perfect. Online cultural events, absolutely. Tyler, yes, in my humanities class, thank you. Are there other questions, or I've taken 42 minutes to be exact, and I do have to tell you if I made any mistake or if I seemed like I was technically unsavvy, please forgive me, because this is my very first Insta Live takeover, as I learned from Pam87, and I'm likely to use it again. Ms. Mocap says, LA Times published an op-ed by John Cho. Check it out to gain some insights on discrimination experiences. Thank you also. Favorite places you have visited? Professor Navarro, are you talking about in Dallas, or are these the places I will... Hi, Kimbo Slice of Cake. Such interesting names. Thank you, Professor Navarro. I didn't know if you were asking me like places to visit after social distancing protocol is relaxed. Vietnam, absolutely. Absolutely. I miss boba tea. It's been 2 months, actually more than that, since I had boba tea. Yes, travels in the past. Okay, so travels in the past. Vietnam would definitely be one of the countries. And actually, it reminded me so much of the wet markets that we've been hearing about related to the COVID-19. To see animals and birds and reptiles in varying stages of decay and death in the markets, and people will come to buy them, shop for them for that evening's or the family meal. Those are some of the hard things to witness, and I'm a vegetarian, so that is especially hard for me. I'm also an animal lover. I have 2 dogs at home, 4 in all that I've had. So I'm a pooch mom, and so these things, they really tug at my heartstring. But we have to accept the world in which we live. It's not my world. The world doesn't revolve around me or any one of us. Independent cultures have grown and thrived for thousands of years, for longer than any one of us can even imagine. So I don't think, as a humanities professor, that any one of us has a right to minimize others' way of doing things. But certainly, if we can have conversations or a larger dialogue, it can certainly contribute to better understanding. And maybe it can bring about change in this world also. Yes. What is boba tea, Pam Ice? It's like, yes, like bubble tea. It has tapioca in it, and you can get a variety of flavors. This is wonderful. Food is always a topic of interest for everybody, and I see we are all now gathered here to talk about food. But if I can have your permission, I will end this Insta Live. And I think it's going to be posted on YouTube. I just need to follow a couple of steps to make sure I do that. Please keep in touch with me. I teach humanities at Richland College. I'm teaching online like all other classes that will be offered in an online format only in the summertime. You can find me under Aditi, Aditi, last name Samarth, Samarth. I teach Humanities 1302, and then this summer I'm also going to teach Humanities 2319, which is American Minority Studies class with a focus on immigration issues, which, as you know, is a hot topic. Thank you all again. And I hope to talk to you again sometime soon. Bye.